So you mentioned we talked about Daniel and we talked about Malachi, and now we talked about Isaiah 53. I just remembered what I think I heard you talking about as far as Rabbi Singer. You mentioned how there's this issue with Psalm 22 and Zechariah 12:10 where they talked about pierced versus, I think, bore a hole or something about a lion. And I forget exactly how that goes, but there was something where you actually went back and you know the language, which I don't. And so you went back and looked at the Dead Sea Scrolls, I believe, if I saw that correctly, and you were able to clarify what's in those verses. You want to speak on that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. I'll try to give the simplified version. So Psalm 22, if you read it in most of our English translations, it says, it could be verse 16, 17, depending on the versification, they pierced my hands and feet. So there's much else in the psalm that's quoted, in the New Testament, Jesus on the cross saying, my God, why did you forsake me?" which is verse 1 of the psalm. And then they parted my garments. That's referenced there from Psalm 22. And the mocker saying, if you're really, God's chosen, come down from the cross. And so you have the parallel of that in the New Testament. But that line, they pierced my hands and feet, is not quoted in the New Testament. So that's the first thing. But if you look in a Jewish translation, it'll say something like, a lion, they're at my hands and feet, or like a lion, they maul my hands and feet. So the Hebrew in almost all of our Masoretic manuscripts, so there are many, many thousands of these, it says ka'ari adai v'raglai, which is like a lion, my hands and my feet. So something's missing there. A verb is missing. Rashi, the foremost biblical commentary in Judaism, lived from 1040 to 1105. He says, like a lion, they mauled my hands and feet. Well, that works fine for me for crucifixion, just that imagery. But where do we get they pierced from? Well, there are a handful of Masoretic manuscripts that read karu or ka'aru, which would mean they dug through, they bore through. And then the Septuagint, which is the oldest Jewish translation, it's Jewish scholars translated the Hebrew Bible into Greek in the centuries before Jesus. They translate with "they pierced." And then in the Dead Sea Scrolls, from some of the later documents, so these would be, around the time of Jesus, it also reads karu rather than ka'ri. In Hebrew, it's the tiny difference. Just a yud is like this and a vav is like this. It's a tiny difference in letters, and you can see how there could be a scribal error. So what I point out is this is not a Christian issue. This is a Jewish issue. Because the oldest Jewish translation, the Septuagint, says they pierced. The oldest Hebrew manuscript of Psalm 22 says they pierced, or they dug through. And then some Masoretic manuscripts, so traditional Jewish manuscripts, read that same way. And then even if it was a lion, what is the lion? Licking my hands and feet, or biting at, tearing at. So it takes away nothing. But what a counter-missionary might do is try to undermine Christian confidence in their Bibles. Look, your translations are wrong, and you're creating messianic prophecies out of nothing. And we say, no, the more you dig, the more you study, the more you see that what we understand is accurate and biblical and sound.
Note that Dr. Brown is a Jew who came to Jesus. He was raised as a Jew in a Jewish family, and through the scriptures and through Jesus' love, Dr. Brown found Christ a long time ago, back in the 70s, and he's been preaching ever since, and he knows the Bible like the back of his hand, and he knows the Hebrew languages. Also note that we were discussing Psalm 22, which was written 1,000 years before Jesus walked the planet. And it says right here, dogs surround me, a pack of villains encircles me. They pierce my hands and my feet. Take note of something really important here. Take note of the fact that the crucifixion, which was invented by the Persians around the 3rd or 4th century BC, had not even been invented at the time when this was written. Also take note of the fact that obviously that's how Jesus was crucified. Cross references you can find in Isaiah 53, which was written about 700 years before Jesus, and Zechariah 12:10, which was also written around the same time as Isaiah. So thank you so much for coming. Please like, subscribe, and do come again. This is just a little knowledge nugget from Dr. Michael Brown.